Starfleet did not authorize this.
Hello everyone, so today we'll be talking about another review. But before I get into the review itself, I just wanted to start by saying thanks to Robotrick1. We were having a really fun discussion about Captain Janeway, Voyager, about its legacy, and about what it still means to Star Trek fans today. And thanks to that conversation, he pointed me to Aurora. And I'm genuinely glad he did, because this was my first time watching this fan-made Star Trek film. And sometimes coming to something fresh like this really sharpens your perspective. So, today, I'll be talking about this film. Not as an idea or a symbol of fandom, but as a genuine Star Trek story. And just one more thing before we start. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, and my goal is quite simple. I just want to talk about what Aurora is doing, what works, and why I think it's worth your time.
Clarification, expectations set, spoiler risk minimized, review parameters acceptable.
One of the things that stood out to me about this film is that it actually knows exactly what kind of story it wants to tell. It's not trying to recreate a television episode, or it's not chasing the spectacle. And what it's really interesting about this one is that it's not relying on the familiar Star Trek shortcuts. Instead, it is focused on people, personal stakes, and the consequences of choices. That focus immediately gives it a very different feel from a lot of Star Trek stories we're kinda used to seeing. And that difference works in its favor. Another part is setting, because this is one of the probably strongest aspects of Aurora for me. Why, you might ask? Well, because this is not a bridge story, this is not a command chair story, and it's not structured around familiar Starfleet hierarchy. By stepping away from a traditional setting, this movie feels more intimate. The universe kind of feels lived in rather than a simple procedural. The story is allowed to unfold on a human scale, and probably more importantly, my brain wasn't trying to make automatic comparisons to the established canon, so I could just simply enjoy the story.
Noted deviation from standard Starfleet vessel fixation, novelty detected.
Look, Star Trek has always been bigger than just ships or technobabble or uniforms. And when stories remember that, they often feel more grounded and more emotionally connected. Now, let's talk about my favorite thing about this movie, animation. Look, anything animated already has my attention, but for this movie, it does more than just benefit visually. Animation gives this story freedom. It allows the film to focus on the atmosphere and pacing and emotional tone without constantly fighting limitation. Look, there are limitations because we are talking about fan film, but it never feels like it's compensating. It feels like it's choosing its form intentionally.
Analysis. Animation increases creative efficiency, budgetary constraints effectively neutralized.
And that intention actually shows throughout the film. Another thing that I really appreciated is the tone. It's not a loud story, it's not trying to outdo some official Star Trek story, and even though it's not trying to shock you, there is going to be let's say a twist. Instead of all of that, this movie actually leans into sincerity and reflection. It actually understands that Star Trek works just as well in quieter moments. Moments where characters are allowed to exist rather than perform.
Assessment. Emotional sincerity detected.
And that emotional restraint makes the story feel thoughtful rather than forced. Now, like I said, because this is an animated project, the voice actually carries a lot of responsibility, and overall the performances feel committed and appropriate to the story being told. Nothing feels exaggerated for the sake of the animation. Nothing felt rushed. The performances actually serve the narrative rather than distract from it. And that balance really matters in a story like this. Aurora also benefits from a very deliberate pacing. It doesn't overload the viewer with exposition, it doesn't rush to the twist, and it actually does trust the audience to stay engaged. This is something Star Trek does best when it's at its strongest, and this movie clearly understands that.
Conclusion: narrative efficiency maintained, viewer cognitive load within acceptable range.
Now, I just want to briefly place this movie in the context of fan films, because Star Trek has one of the longest and probably the most passionate fan film traditions in all of the fandom. Yeah, I'm not gonna be objective about this, but fan films do exist because Star Trek really does encourage imagination and participation, and also personal storytelling. But Aurora doesn't only rely on that context to actually justify itself. It actually stands on its own merits of a story. Fan films are not competition for me. They are the continuation of a story.
Philosophical note: ownership distributed across fandom, corporate exclusivity disproven.
And at the end of the day, the question I always ask when it comes to especially fan films is very simple. Does this feel like Star Trek? And for me, Aurora actually does. Not because it checks some boxes, not because it references familiar events, but because it engages with some of the core ideas of Star Trek, like empathy and responsibility, consequence and choice. This feels like a story told by someone who genuinely cares about the universe. And guess what? Since this is a fan film, and I can bet that the budget was not big, I'm convinced they actually care about the universe they're trying to tell this story in. So, do I recommend this movie? Absolutely yes. I do recommend Aurora. I recommend it as a Star Trek story. I also recommend it as an animated project. And I recommend it as a thoughtful piece of fan-created work. If you enjoy Aurora, there is also a short teaser on their channel, and I'm not giving anything away. I'll just say it was posted about 3 months ago, and I was super happy to see it. And before we wrap this up, I just want to say one more thing. I can promise this is not going to be a one-off. Thanks to Robotrick 1, I clearly got hooked again. And this is going to be just one of many fan film reviews that will be coming to this channel. So, if you happen to have some suggestions, if there's a film you love or one you think I should check out next, let me know in the comments below. I would really love to hear your recommendations.
Review complete. Aurora evaluation prioritized. Runtime optimized. Recommendation efficiency 95%. Support the organic creator. Like, share and subscribe.